The 7th of September, 1945. In the skeletal remains of Berlin, a city of ghosts, the victorious Allies held a parade. Upon the grandstand, British officers watched with a certain satisfaction as columns of their own hardware rolled by. But then, the ground began to tremble, and down the scarred avenue rumbled 52. A cold wave of disbelief washed over the British contingent. These were the IS-3 heavy tanks, low, wide, with flattened hemispherical turrets and a predatory pike-nose prow. The officers looked at these steel leviathans and understood in one sickening moment that their brand-new Centurions, the pride of their armored corps, were little more than prey. Against these monsters they stood no chance. The specifications were a litany of Soviet superiority. A 122mm main cannon, 110mm of brilliantly sloped armor, an almost fluid hull designed to make shells simply glance off. Soviet designers had created a machine that was years ahead of its time. Back in the headquarters of the British Army, a quiet panic began to fester. One officer would later recall the moment. When the IS-3 appeared, he said, "I remember everyone saying, 'This is frightening. What can we possibly do?'" And indeed, what could they do? Their first-generation Centurion carried a 76mm gun and was protected by just 76mm of flat armor. In a direct confrontation, it was a foregone conclusion. The Soviet tank could punch through the Centurion's frontal plate from 1,200 meters away. In return, the British could do almost nothing. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The Soviet Union was planning mass production. The British command envisioned unstoppable armadas of these steel beasts pouring through the Fulda Gap, a relentless tide aimed straight for the English Channel. An answer was needed, and it was needed immediately. British engineers received a stark directive: create a tank capable of destroying these Soviet machines at extreme range, from a distance where their own crews would be safe from the devastating reply. Thus was born the project that, after 10 long years, would become the FV-214 Conqueror, the heaviest and most powerful tank in the history of the British Army. Development began with the chassis of a cancelled project, the A-45 Infantry Support Tank. Initially, the plan was to arm this new hull with an 84mm 20-pounder cannon. But by 1949, it was clear this was not enough. Soviet design bureaus were not idle. The British made a radical decision: to mount a colossal 120mm gun. It was a weapon of immense power, capable of firing an armor-piercing round at over 1,300 meters per second, a velocity designed to shatter any Soviet armor of the era. While engineers struggled to design a turret large enough to house this new cannon, the Army needed something to test the chassis. This led to an interim vehicle, the FV-221 Carnarvon. It was the body of the future Conqueror, but fitted with the turret of a Centurion. 21 of these hybrids were built. They would never see battle, used exclusively to prove the viability of a chassis born not from a desire for victory, but from a profound and chilling fear. It was the first move in a deadly new game, where the shadow of a single machine could dictate the fate of nations. Though its development had provided engineers with priceless experience, its early form was little more than a test bed for training crews. But by 1954, the turret, housing a colossal 120mm gun, was finally ready. It was mounted onto a modified hull, and from the crucible of Cold War necessity, the FV-214 Conqueror was born. The first production machines rolled off the assembly lines in 1955, and they were a truly breathtaking sight. 64 tons of combat mass, armor plating up to 180 millimeters thick on the frontal arc of its turret, and a main armament capable of striking targets at distances where the crew of a Soviet IS-3 might not even comprehend from where their death had arrived. In total, British industry would produce just 185 Conquerors, 20 of the first modification, and 165 of the second. Production ceased in 1959. These tanks were conceived as the final line of defense, a specialized breed of hunter designed to stalk the Soviet heavy armor that haunted NATO's nightmares. They were to operate from behind the main battle line of Centurions, acting as long-range snipers, methodically eliminating enemy behemoths from a position of relative safety. When the Conqueror first emerged from the factory gates, even the most seasoned tankers would stop and stare in astonishment. This machine looked as if it had been created not merely for war, but for intimidation through its very presence. The massive hull, with its characteristic arrangement of 8 pairs of small road wheels on each side, was a clear echo of the famous Churchill. This was no accident. The Conqueror had inherited the Churchill's core concept as an infantry tank, with an uncompromising emphasis on armor and cross-country mobility. The drive sprockets were located at the rear, the idlers at the front, and between them stretched wide, formidable tracks that allowed this giant to traverse soft ground that would swallow lesser vehicles. Its Horstman suspension became one of the key technical solutions defining the machine's character. Each bogie unit consisted of 2 road wheels and a single return roller, all mounted on an external balanced beam. It was a work of brilliant simplicity. In the event of a mine strike or combat damage, the crew could replace an entire suspension unit in the field without having to dismantle half the tank to do it. The steel road wheels, with rubber buffers between each pair, reduced the risk of throwing a track on rough terrain, while the sheer width of the tracks themselves granted the Conqueror surprisingly good mobility for a vehicle of its staggering weight. The heart of this Leviathan was the Rolls-Royce Meteor M120 engine, a 12-cylinder petrol motor generating 810 horsepower. Aviation enthusiasts would immediately recognize its pedigree, for it was a direct descendant of the legendary Merlin, the very same engine that lifted Spitfires and Lancasters into the skies during the Second World War. The tank version was, of course, detuned and adapted for terrestrial use, but the genes of that thoroughbred power plant could be felt in every cycle of its operation. This was the same engine used in the Centurion, a decision that vastly simplified supply and maintenance for the British Army. However, 810 horsepower for 64 tons of steel was frankly not enough. The Conqueror's power-to-weight ratio was a mere 12.5 horsepower per ton, making it one of the most deliberate tanks of its era. It was a giant that moved with immense purpose, but never with any particular haste. A silent guardian, built for a specific, terrible purpose, whose greatest victory was that it never had to fight. In the vast, churning landscapes of Cold War Europe, the Conqueror was never a creature of speed. Its theoretical maximum velocity crested at a mere 34 kilometers per hour, a figure its crews, in practice, seldom even approached. But on broken ground, in the mud and mire that so often defined the frontier, this steel Leviathan found its footing. Here, the Conqueror felt more assured, more powerful than its lighter stablemate, the Centurion. Its wide tracks and robust suspension allowed it to claw its way across terrain where other tanks would have hopelessly bogged down. Yet, deep within the machine's guts, the transmission held a nasty surprise for the unwary. Two different gearboxes were fitted to the Conqueror line, the Z52 and the Z52R. Both offered 5 forward gears and 2 in reverse, but their shift patterns were perfect mirror images of each other. The lever position that engaged first gear on one box would slam the other into reverse. A driver moving from one tank to another had to make it his absolute first priority to identify which transmission he was commanding. A moment's hesitation, a simple lapse of muscle memory, and instead of surging forward to meet a threat, 64 tons of British steel could lurch violently backward, with potentially catastrophic consequences for anything, or anyone, unfortunate enough to be standing behind. But mobility was secondary. The Conqueror's entire existence, its very reason for being, was embodied in its main armament, the Royal Ordnance L1, a 120mm rifled cannon. This was a weapon forged for a single purpose: the destruction of heavily armored targets. To this end, it employed 2 distinct types of shell. The first was an armor-piercing discarding sabot round, known simply to the military as a PDS. A dense tungsten core was cradled within a lightweight casing, which the crews often said lowering 1,433 meters per second. At a distance of nearly 2 kilometers, it could punch clean through 120 millimeters of steel plate angled at 55 degrees. After leaving the muzzle, the sabot would peel away, its job done, leaving the compact and impossibly fast penetrator to fly silently toward its target. The second munition was a particular favorite of British tankers: the high-explosive squash head, or HESH. Its principle of operation was diabolically clever. Upon impact, the malleable plastic explosive did not detonate. Instead, it flattened against the armite the charge. The resulting shockwave, channeled directly into the metal, would cause a large, lethal fragment, a spall, to be violently torn from the armor's interior wall. This jagged piece of the enemy tank's own hull would then ricochet around the fighting compartment, annihilating crew and equipment. The true genius of HESH was that its effectiveness was not dependent on velocity. The shell was just as deadly at its maximum effective range of 2,600 meters as it was at point-blank range. The Conqueror's ammunition complement consisted of 35 rounds of this 2-piece ammunition. The projectiles and the brass propellant charges were stored separately. This arrangement certainly created complexities for the loader, demanding a strenuous 2-stage process for every single shot fired. But it dramatically reduced the risk of a catastrophic ammunition fire if the tank was hit. A portion of the ready rounds was stowed in the turret for quick access, while the remainder, including 25 propellant cases, was housed in the hull, in a compartment to the left of the drive. All of this was enclosed within a turret that was a masterpiece of casting, a complaint. It was a fortress, a purpose-built sanctuary for the weapon that defined the tank. The Conqueror was more than a machine. It was an answer to a question, a 64-ton solution to a very specific fear, a cold and brutal expression of post-war deterrence, cast in steel. Its sloped frontal armor flowed seamlessly back, culminating in a cavernous bustle at the rear, a space dedicated to ammunition and the intricate machinery of war. But it was a different feature that truly set the Conqueror apart. Perched Adder's cupola. It was this structure, this separate little fortress, that concealed the tank's greatest technical marvel. For within this steel citadel lay the Conqueror's true secret weapon, a fire control system so advanced. British engineers, for the first time in history, had created and deployed on a production tank a system that would later be given a chillingly accurate name: Hunter Killer. Its genius resided in a revolutionary division of labor between the tank's commander and its gunner. The commander's cupola, equipped with its own electric drive, could rotate a full 360 degrees, completely independent of the main turret's position. Inside this perch, the commander was an all-seeing eye, equipped with his own periscope for scanning the terrain, a precision optical rangefinder, and a sight with 6-fold magnification. He was not merely a passenger. He was the master of the... To the right of his sight was the control handle for his rotating domain, while a special azimuth indicator constantly informed him of the main gun's bearing. The system, in practice, was a symphony of deadly efficiency. The commander would scan the horizon, his cupola silently slewing. Upon identifying a threat, he would use the rangefinder to instantly measure the distance, passing the data to the gunner below, while simultaneously bringing the main turret to bear on the target's general direction. The gunner would then take over, apply the final precise adjustments, and unleash the fury of the 120mm cannon. But here, the revolution truly began. While the gunner was prosecuting that first target, the commander was already losing no time. He was spinning his cupola away, his eyes already searching for the next shadow, the next glint of enemy steel. He would find a second threat, range it, and have the firing solution ready. The moment the gunner reported the first target destroyed, the commander could instantly slave the main turret to his own line of sight, feeding the new coordinates to the gunner. The process would repeat, a relentless, overlapping cycle of destruction. This dance of death slashed the time between engaging separate targets by a factor that was previously unimaginable. Moreover, the commander held the ultimate authority. His controls allowed him to completely override the gunner, to aim and fire the main gun himself if the situation demanded it. He also commanded a 7.62mm machine gun mounted on his cupola, fed by belts of 200 or 250 rounds, giving him a personal tool for suppressing infantry or engaging light targets. This entire arrangement granted the crew a tactical flexibility that was simply unavailable to any other armored vehicle of its era. The Conqueror was the very first British tank to be equipped with an optical rangefinder. Before this, tankers determined distance by eye, by instinct, or through the crude method of bracketing, firing shots short and long of the target, wasting precious time and priceless ammunition. Now, the commander could ascertain the exact range with the press of a button. At distances beyond a kilometer, this provided a colossal advantage. Where the crew of a Soviet IS-3 was still squinting, still guessing, still firing ranging shots to walk their shells onto a target, the Conqueror was already sending a lethal tungsten penetrator to its... It was a fundamental shift in the philosophy of tank warfare. It demonstrated that the next great leap would not necessarily come from thicker armor or a larger gun, but from the ability to see first, to understand first, and to strike first. The battlefield was no longer just a brawl. It was becoming a lethal, high-speed chess match, and the Conqueror had just been taught a devastating new opening move. But for every revolutionary system, there is a shadow, a price to be paid. For the commander of the FV-214 Conqueror, that price was isolation. He was, in the most literal sense, entombed in his advanced rotating cupola, a steel island cut off from the rest of his crew. Sergeant John Chappell, who commanded a Conqueror during his service, would later recall the stark contrast with his previous machine. In the Centurion, the crew was a family, you see, he explained. But in the Conqueror, you climbed up into this contraption on top. The loader was somewhere down there. The gunner was somewhere over there. And the driver, God, no lean over and have a word with the gunner or the operator. You were just stuck up on the mountain, alone. All human connection, all the subtle, unspoken communication of a crew that lives and breathes as one, was severed. It was replaced entirely by the cold crackle of the tank's intercom system. And if that fragile electronic link failed, the commander was instantly transformed into a silent, helpless observer. A king trapped in a gilded cage, unable to direct his own kingdom. Worse still was the very mechanism that gave him his panoramic view, the cupola's electric traverse. It was a notoriously fickle piece of engineering that failed with maddening regularity. And in a stunning oversight, the designers had provided no manual backup, no hand crank, no emergency gear. When the electrics died, the turret simply froze in place. The commander's all-seeing eye was rendered blind, his ability to scan for threats and designate targets utterly lost. Chappell described the reality of it with a soldier's bluntness. If the electrics broke, which they often did, well, that was it. You were stuck. This mechanical frailty fed into the one question that gnawed at British G Conqueror and its Soviet nemesis, the IS-3. On paper, the British tank held the advantage. Its superior range and faster rate of fire, combined with a devastating 120mm cannon, could theoretically punch through Soviet armor at standard combat distances. Yet when asked this very question, Sergeant Chappell was cautious. His answer grounded not in statistics, but in the grim realities of armored warfare. The problem is, he considered, the IS-3 was so low. It could be sitting in a hull-down position in the bushes and would probably have knocked out a couple of Centurions first, before the Conqueror even got a chance to move up. But thankfully, we never had to find out. So it's all just guesswork. Chappell himself admitted the Conqueror left him with deeply mixed feelings. We got the impression it was too complicated, Jokin. If the commander suffered the psychological torment of isolation, the loader endured a trial of a wholly different and more brutal kind. His job was arguably the most physically punishing of any tank crewman of that era. The Conqueror's massive gun used two-part ammunition, which meant that every single shot required a grueling two-stage ballet of muscle and steel. First, he had to manhandle the projectile, a dense slug of metal weighing up to 16 kilograms, or nearly 36 pounds. Then, he had to heave the brass propellant cartridge into the breech, a charge weighing as much as 23 kilograms, over 50 pounds. Almost 40 kilograms, a staggering 88 pounds, for every single round fired. All of this performed in the deafening, cramped confines of the fighting compartment, amidst the thunder of the gun and the violent clang of machinery. The tank's full complement of 35 rounds was stowed throughout the vehicle. A portion was kept in ready racks around the turret for what was termed quick access, but even for these, the loader had to wrestle with immense weights in a space that barely allowed him to stand. It was a design that demanded the strength of a titan and the endurance of a marathon runner. A brutal testament to the human cost of firepower. In its quest for a weapon to dominate the battlefield, the Conqueror had created a machine that, in many ways, waged a war on the very men who were meant to master. When the ready rounds were spent, the real ordeal began. For the loader, it meant a series of desperate acrobatic contortions inside the violent, lurching world of a tank on the move. Down in the hull, to the left of the driver, lay the main store. 25 propellant charges, 25 promises of survival. But reaching them was a brutal physical trial, a frantic scramble against the sway and shudder of the machine. Yet, this was not the true curse of the loader's station. That particular damnation came in the form of a mechanism intended by its designers to make his life easier. It was the automatic spent casing ejector. The story of its creation would be a comical anecdote, were it not so tragically true. The British War Office had commissioned the device from a company named Malins, a firm whose primary expertise was in the manufacture of cigarette vending machines. Yes, the very same machines where one drops a coin and receives a pack of smokes. Apparently, some mind in the ministry concluded that the delicate logic required to dispense a paper packet of tobacco was roughly analogous to the violent business of ejecting a red-hot, 7-pound brass artillery shell. The resulting Malins system was a cumbersome, clumsy contraption, bolted behind the gun's breech, complete with a perspex screen to shield the crew from its inevitable misfires. In theory, the principle was elegant. After a shot, the searing casing would fall onto a special tray, depressing a micro switch that activated the ejection arm. The casing would then be whisked away and flung out through a small hatch in the turret's side. Simple, clean. In practice, it turned the inside of the tank into a living hell. The casing would constantly slip from its guides, clattering anywhere and everywhere except where it was supposed to go. Sometimes it would lodge itself between the recoiling breech and the turret roof, jamming the main gun solid at the worst possible moment. Other times, the mechanism would simply give up halfway through its cycle, leaving the ejection hatch gaping open. An open port in the side of a turret during the cacophony of battle is a gilt-edged invitation to any enemy infantryman with a grenade. Even a raw recruit would not struggle to post a high-explosive charge through such a welcoming aperture. There was, of course, a manual override for such emergencies, but using it required the loader to crank a small handle for what took a full 5 minutes, an absolute eternity when steel is tearing through the air outside. Sergeant Chappell described the system with a barely concealed fury. The gun fires, he recalled, and this huge red-hot casing falls to the floor. What's the loader to do with it? He's got to try and pick it up and chuck it out of the hatch, which means the hatch is open. Or there's this little handle you have to turn forever to get the hatch open and get the thing out. In his words, when the system worked, it was a fine thing, but it almost never worked. While the loader wrestled with this engineering nightmare, the driver sat in his own world in the forward hull, on the right. Before him were 2 tillers for the steering clutches. Between his knees, the gear lever jutted from the floor. The pedals were a classic arrangement: clutch to the left, brake in the center, and the accelerator on the right. On the instrument panel before him, the gauges offered a steady, if frantic, report on the machine's health. It is here, in the gulf between the driver's predictable controls and the loader's chaotic battle with a repurposed vending machine, that the true nature of warfare technology is revealed. It is a world where the most elegant solution on a blueprint can become the most lethal flaw on the battlefield. A stark reminder that the crucible of combat respects no logic but its own. Within the steel confines of the driver's station, the world was reduced to a symphony of analog dials and heavy levers. Gauges for temperature, fuel, and speed offered a constant, vital report. Below them, the robust switches for the batteries and generators stood ready. Crucially, a turret position indicator gave the driver the one piece of information he desperately needed: which way the enormous gun was pointing. The seat itself was a clever piece of engineering, adjustable in height, allowing the driver to pilot the machine in 2 distinct modes. He could raise it high, his head and shoulders exposed to the elements through the open hatch, a commander of the road. Or he could lower himself into the relative safety of the hull, navigating the world through the narrow, distorted view of his periscopes. The initial Mark I Conqueror featured a trio of these viewing ports. Later, on the Mark II, these were replaced by a single, far more advanced optical device. This was not the only change. The second modification could be identified by the altered shape of the fume extractor on its massive gun barrel, and by the raw, unmuffled roar of its straight-through exhaust pipes, a stark contrast to the more subdued first version. Sergeant Chappell, a man who had tamed this beast, remembered his time at the controls with a certain warmth. The engine, he recalled, was a fuel-injected thing, about 800 horsepower, and she went well. Driving it was, in his words, an excellent experience. It still demanded the old ways, the double clutching and the brute force, but when you were at the helm of a Conqueror, everyone else simply got out of your way. It was good behind the wheel, he'd say. Noisy, of course. With the metal tracks on the road, the racket was just awful. But from a mechanical side, everything seemed to work. He would then add a crucial caveat, although the repairmen might have had a different opinion. And the repairmen most certainly did. The Conqueror was a machine perpetually haunted by the specter of unreliability. It was fundamentally, fatally underpowered for its immense 64-ton weight. The maintenance brigades of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers were run ragged, fighting a losing battle to keep these titans operational. The armored recovery vehicles built on the same chassis performed their duties admirably, but the gun tanks, burdened by the colossal weight of the turret and its 120mm cannon, constantly stalled. They would refuse to start, their great engines falling silent with a final, shuddering cough. No amount of tuning or delicate adjustment could ever truly solve the problem. These were the machines sent to the British Army of the Rhine, deployed in West Germany, at the very epicenter of a potential Soviet onslaught. They were distributed sparingly throughout the tank regiments, a few units per division, their tactical role strictly defined. The Conquerors were to be the snipers. Their doctrine dictated they take up overwatch positions, tactically distant from the main force of Centurions, and from there, engage Soviet heavy tanks from ranges where an effective reply was impossible. On the pristine surfaces of staff maps, the concept was flawless. But reality proved to be a far more complicated affair. Every training exercise, every field deployment became a struggle for the crews, not against a simulated enemy, but against their own vehicle. The 64-ton giant was as temperamental as a thoroughbred racehorse. Its engine would die at the most inopportune moment, refusing to restart in the cold German air or after a long, punishing road march. The complex electrics of the commander's cupola, a key advantage, would fail with soul-crushing regularity, blinding the commander and robbing him of his ability to independently seek out targets. Even the shell casing ejection mechanism would jam, turning the frantic, rhythmic work of the loader into a desperate, fumbling fight with a hot piece of brass. The dream of a long-range killer was forever at war with the reality of a machine that seemed determined to defeat itself. Cursing through clenched teeth, they would manually eject the searing brass casings through the emergency hatch. For the repair crews of the light evacuation units, the work was a relentless grind. They learned to fix the Conqueror literally on their knees in the mud and rain of the German plains. In these field conditions, they wrestled with changing the complex Horstmann suspension units, painstakingly tracing faults in the capricious electrics, and constantly retuning an engine that seemed to be in a perpetual state of disarray. Spare parts were consumed by these machines with a ravenous appetite. Every single operational Conqueror on the line represented dozens, if not hundreds, of man-hours from exhausted mechanics and literal mountains of expended components. It was a logistical nightmare, a beast that demanded a constant tribute of steel and sweat just to keep it breathing. And yet, while these crews toiled, something entirely unexpected was unfolding on the other V-tanks, was proving to be a phantom. The Soviet Union, never began the mass production that Western intelligence had so dreaded. The IS-3, the very tank that had sent a chill down the spines of Allied observers at the Berlin Victory Parade, turned out to be a machine plagued by its own litany of problems. Its fighting compartment was impossibly cramped, its rate of fire agonizingly slow, and its mechanical reliability was, to put it mildly, questionable. Soviet military theorists, in a moment of historical irony, were arriving at the exact same conclusions as their Western counterparts. The future, they decided, did not belong to these lumbering behemoths. It belonged to a new kind of universal combat vehicle, a machine that could achieve a rational, effective balance of mobility, protection, and firepower. So as the conquerors began to rust on the training grounds of West Germany, British engineers were not idle. The humble Centurion, the workhorse of the Royal Armoured Corps, was being consistently, brilliantly modernized. It was receiving ever more powerful armament. First, its 76mm gun was replaced by the formidable 20-pounder, an 84mm cannon. But then came the true revolution, the installation of the now famous L7 rifled gun, a 105mm masterpiece. This cannon was a triumph of the British School of Ordnance, a weapon so effective it spread across the entire Western world. It was mounted on American Pattons, German Leopards, and Israeli Schott tanks. With this weapon, a Centurion could confidently engage and destroy any Soviet armor at realistic combat distances. Suddenly, the entire justification for the enormous, clumsy, and temperamental Conqueror simply evaporated. By the dawn of the 1960s, British High Command made its decision. The heavy tanks were too expensive to operate, too complex to maintain, and they demanded a completely separate and burdensome logistics chain. They no longer fit into the concept of a modern, mobile army. The 185 machines that had been built would serve for just 11 years, from 1955 to 1966, before being withdrawn. In its place came the Chieftain, a new main battle tank that embodied the very idea of a universal machine, capable of fulfilling any role on the battlefield. The Chieftain inherited the Conqueror's most potent features, the 120mm caliber of its main gun and its advanced fire control system. But it shed the crippling excess mass and all the problems that came with it. The hunter-killer principle, a system where the commander could independently scan for new targets while the gunner engaged the current one, was first truly implemented on the Conqueror. It became the absolute standard for every subsequent generation of main battle tank across the globe. The optical rangefinder, once considered a miracle of 1950s technology, eventually gave way to precise laser systems. But the core idea, the one the Conqueror paid so dearly to prove, remained. The unwavering principle that the first, most accurate shot is the one that determines survival. The technology may change, but the hunt itself is eternal. The thunder of its 120mm gun would never be heard in anger. Most decommissioned Conquerors ended their days on bleak firing ranges, serving as silent targets for a new generation of weapons. Others were cast in a different role. Stoic, unmoving monuments at the gates of military bases, their cannons forever aimed at a phantom enemy. A handful found their way into museums and private collections, where they are slowly, inevitably, consumed by the elements. Rusting steel hulks that serve as a final testament to the brief, tense era of the Cold War heavy tank. One of these veterate its decaying hull. The Conqueror never met its intended adversary, the Soviet IS-3, on the battlefield. The Cold War, thankfully, remained cold. The question of which steel giant would have triumphed in that duel will forever remain the subject of debate among historians. The age of heavy tanks, a time when victory was sought through ever thicker armor and larger calibers, had passed. The concept of the universal main battle tank had won the day. And so, the Conqueror stands as a 64-ton monument to a bygone time. A time when a Soviet behemoth instilled such fear that Britain felt compelled to forge its own monster in reply. These machines, built for a war that never came, are not just relics of engineering, but fossils of our own anxieties.